Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of V Next. I am your host, Mike Walker, and today we're going to talk about how the world of innovation is evolving. And this is going to be more from a consultant's point of view. And I've got a perfect guest today to be able to walk us through this. Uh, Chris Lockhart and we've known each other for a number of years, probably 15 or more years. He's an expert enterprise architect. He's a strategist. He's an author. And he's a consultant that likes to say things. At least that's what his podcast is called. We're going to discuss the evolution of innovation over the years, the trends that he observes in the marketplace, and his practical advice on how to innovate within the trenches. And so it's going to be a really good episode. Stick around. It's going to be good. So, like with all other episodes, all the show notes and links are on vnextpod.com. That's vnextpod.com. All right, guys, let's get into it. And this is the first time you're here. So I'm glad I was able to reel you in for this podcast.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. And I think, when we talked to you, it was, I don't know, it was a while back, I think the first time. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. We'll do cross, podcast type stuff. And then the years go by, right? Or something like that. And so no, I'm glad we finally got around to doing it. And happy to be here. When I watch these, when I watch, your podcast, I find pretty interesting topics coming up, right? And this theme of innovation, can maybe become like a trope for some people, but I think the way you guys deal with it here, right, it's very interesting. So happy to be here.
Try to spice it up as much as possible and pepper in my own little interests because you have to have fun with this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want me to slam Gartner or Microsoft, or because I could do either.
Let's pepper that into the conversation as we go, so we can get as much out of those digs as possible.
We'll tease those threads. Okay,
right.
Great.
But first, before we jump too far into this, you and we've known each other. I don't even know how long.
I think it's 10 years. 12 years, something.
Something like that.
I mean, we knew each other online, and then I think I met you at a Open Group conference in San Francisco. So yeah,
way it's been a while. Back when. So for those that don't know you for the past decade or more, it'd be good to kind of walk through who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah. All right. So for the next 3 hours, let's get my slide presentation up. I always lead with this because I think it makes it makes a difference, and it sets the context for me, right? I'm a liberal arts major. So many of my peers that are in management consulting or, have an enterprise architecture background tend to come from either, computer science or, mathematics or something like that, or on the management consultant side, they're all MBAs or they have poli-sci or something like that, right? I'm liberal arts. I'm a history major, right? And so how did I get into consulting? I remember early on, I was at Boston University where I went to school, and I went to the job board. My parents had cut me off, so I went to the job board. And on the job board, by the way, this was like an actual board on the wall, not like, a BBS, right? It's it used to be this thing. It was made of cork. You had these little thumbtacks, and you would put the tack in the thing. So there were these pieces of paper up there, and it said, I remember very clearly, it was a job board, and it said, play video games, make $8 an hour. I was like, yes. That's what I'm going to do the rest of my life, and I don't need an education. I'm done. This is it. I'm rich. Yeah, absolutely. And so, I went and I did that. And what it was at the time, it was basically what we would now call sort of offshoring or outsourcing of customer service and beta testing and fulfillment and things of that nature. But it was in Boston. So that was sort of my introduction to like IT, because as you get into it and you begin to like do things like take customer complaints or customer issues, you need databases and you need, ways to access that information and all of those sorts of things, which led to sort of content management, which led to sort of records management and document management. And so now you begin to get into the multiple tier architectures of things, right? And I was a user of these systems, but we were, it was the 90s, man. We were like, cobbling together stuff to get stuff to work the way that we needed it to work. And so, yeah, we ended up creating what you would now call a content management system. But at the time we were like, wow, we can store like objects and text in a database and then query the database with like a key and it'll pull back that thing. And we can dynamically build pages like, holy crap, this is amazing. Like, the future is now. We're on the enterprise or something, right? Like that's how it felt. So that led me into IT. Right. Now you fast forward, 20 years, you move from sort of, building systems and working on systems and integrating systems. And then I went into like Fortune 500 and lived in a cubicle where it's like you're doing that for other internal constituencies in an organization, performing what you would now call architecture work. I didn't call it that at the time, right? It was, well, I know how to do this. I know how to make this work for you on your project. Let me help with that. And then, you move along, right? And you come to the point where it's like, hey, I'd like to be in a position to help, people be making decisions about the technology that they want to use or the problems they want to solve, right? And not be just the guy banging on a keyboard in the data center, working on a 43p, in the middle of a data center where it's, 20 degrees and you're freezing and, that sort of thing. So yeah, I gradually moved into business consulting, management consulting, which I've now been doing for years. And with that, it's what I call enterprise architecture. And I know, right, that raises people's hackles when it's like, well, it's like a relativism around what the definition of it is. For me, what it is, right, is helping clients understand problems that they may have and ways to solve those problems. And that's it. Right. And, you notice I didn't say with tools because sometimes it's not about tools. Sometimes it's about people and org and process and other things. Generally, you end up with technology at some point in there. But that's kind of how I view it. And so I'm an enterprise architect with a history degree. Go figure.
Right. And you didn't even mention a framework in there or, some sort of tool.
Should I mention a framework? I can, let's, no, I never got certified in any framework. Nothing. I think I took ITIL one time back in the day where you played the board game, right? Where you moved like components around or whatever it was. But no, I never got certified in basically anything because, I would get into it and I'm like, well, I know how to do X. I know all about WebSphere 3.5.6. I know how to, I don't need the certification from IBM to justify it to myself. Now I get that, right? That people want those certs to sort of, put 50 sort of, acronyms at the end of their name to show what they've accomplished. The way I feel, it's like, I'm going to show what I accomplished by what I do, right? Rather than sort of what cert I have. I know people are big on certifications, but I'm not. I just kind of look at it as like, well, I didn't need an MBA to become a management consultant. So right. I probably don't need a certification to understand, how to architect a solution to a problem. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It could be I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. At least maybe this is why we get along so well that, I'm only certified in one certification and it has nothing to really do with enterprise architecture per se. Right. I kind of objected to a lot of that as well. Going back to, hey, I've demonstrated my competencies through all these other things that I've done. I don't really need a multiple guess exam to say whether or not I know something, right? Did you, a lot of it, that's what it is.
But did you find like, did that hold you back at all? Did that predetermine career choices or anything like that?
No, the good enterprise architects, as you had articulated, is they know the higher order bit of this stuff is helping to facilitate the decision-making process. And right. So if there was a perfect background for an enterprise architect, it would be psychology. It would
Yeah,
be,
I think
how
you're
do
right.
I get these
Yeah,
people that are stubborn as hell, that are in these
yeah.
senior positions that may be highly insecure with themselves or their position or
No,
life or
can't
whatever
say
it may
that.
be.
Oh,
And how do I get these people to come together and actually do the right
yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Um, I find a lot of my job as a strategist, as an enterprise architect, as an innovator is really that. It's a
yeah.
lot of family counseling, bringing these people together.
Yeah. Yeah, I call it marriage counseling, right? It's and I remember, I don't know why it sticks in my head. I mean, you know how many people you've interacted with over the course of your career, but I had this one conversation with who a person I consider to be my mentor. His name's David Baker. He was a partner at Diamond, which is a company I belonged to back in the day, which was acquired by Price Waterhouse. And he stayed on there for a while as well. But he, at one point, we're in this meeting and it's one of these things, everyone's, mentally drained, end of the day, there's like Chinese food on the table, right? And it's like, we've got all these slides and Excel up, all over the place. And he sits back and he goes, what business problem are we trying to solve here? Right. And it was like everyone looked at each other like, oh my God, like we've never asked that question. Like that's the key question we should be asking. And so for me, that became sort of my framework, right?
Yep.
My certification is, right, what business problem are we solving? Because if we're solving just like a technology problem, that has its own sort of things. If we're solving like, some people problems, right? That's, if we're solving business problems, that encompasses both technology and people and
Yep.
process and lots of other things. And so I always try to ask that question, and it's not always easy to get to an answer. And people that I work with sometimes get infuriated because I'll tend to sort of abstract a little bit on some things to try to get to that answer, because I think that's just critical.
It is, and I think we have a tendency in this profession to get a little too wrapped up in what we're doing and lose perspective on what's the
No,
greater problem that we're trying to solve. And
right.
what I do when I'm in those situations, very similar to what you said, I actually call it the 5 whys.
Mm.
And essentially, it's asking the question why, but you need to ask it multiple times, because the first why becomes a bit surfacey, broad, etc. But it's continuing to be obnoxious, like a 3-year-old kid that constantly asks you, "Why are you doing this?" Uh, Getting to the point of the lowest common denominator and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's why we're doing this. We're doing this because there was a article in the paper that said we don't know how to manage XYZ funds. There's a perception issue on this line of business, this executive.
Yep.
He or she is pissed off and pointing the finger at IT saying, "Hey guys, how could you let this happen?" And
Right.
so that's the problem we're trying to solve. We're not trying to solve the problem of the enterprise content management strategy and the portal technologies and vendors across the board. No, let's go back to the root issue here. What are we trying to solve here?
Yeah, and the example that you used, right, is some executive's name shows up in the paper or on CNBC or something, on Squawk Box, right, and it's like suddenly they're like, how did you let the reporting system make me look like this, right, kind of thing, and it's like, we need a new reporting system, go, right? Well, wait a second.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the reporting system. I mean, it might be the data, right? But it's not. There are other things at play here. And so, yeah, I think you're right about really getting to the root of the problem. The other way to get there, right? Which I know they train you in various management consulting firms, right? Is the so what approach, right? It's like, the sky's blue. So what? Well, that means that we can't see space, which is black. Well, so what? Well, we don't really know what, and continuing to drill down until you get something that's really insightful at the end of the so what. If you can't ask so what anymore, you might be at the right place, right? Kind of thing. But yeah, I just don't think it's a skill that I don't think it's trained. I don't think it's taught. I think it's acquired. I mean, I've written and talked and stuff about like, the degree to which architecture is an art versus a science. And, I know there are sciencey aspects to it, right? There's math involved, there's things of that nature, but there's an awful lot of art involved, I think, as well. Because I think, there's, context matters, right? And context is not always perceived by people in the same way at the same time. So yeah, so I don't know, right? It's like, yeah, is it an art or a science? And I've come down on both sides of that question over time.
It's a good question. I don't necessarily know the answer to it. I think that there's definitely an argument for both sides. Well, actually, I would say that there's a really good argument for the position that you made, that, there are people with innate abilities that are able to hone in on kind of the more EQ side versus the IQ side. And we see that already, that people can be predispositioned, on that spectrum there. And I think that's completely legitimate. And then, I think about also there is the incentive side of the house as well. Some people are just incented and want to grow in that area. And sometimes the
Yeah.
best enterprise architects are the ones that don't necessarily have that innate skill, but they're
Mm.
so passionate about the space that they continuously want to get better. Now, keep in mind, these folks, there's very few of them that I've ran across in my career. And that's not because of them being special or not. I think it's more happenstance and their desire and passion to be able to solve really, really big problems, really
Yeah.
meaty, risky problems. Uh, but they didn't have those innate kind of EQ based skills on how to read a room, how, knowing that if I've got a CFO in a room, a CIO in a room, a line of business lead, et cetera, that when I talk to those people independently and in that room, I will be changing how I speak, and knowing and appreciating that, instead of trying to fight it and say, oh, well, I shouldn't have to adjust my language or use different words or use different examples. It's realizing that people are coming from a different place, and your job is the arbiter. It's to bring people together and help them understand how to make these big, hairy decisions. And
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah. It's extremely difficult, right? Because in a lot of cases, not all cases, but a lot of cases, truth can be, really subjective, right? For a lot of these folks, depending on the lens with which they're looking at something, they're going to have a different take on it. And so if you go in there and bang the table and say, there is objective truth and this is what it is, this is the answer, there is no other answer, you're just not going to be successful in that line of work, right? This goes back to what we were saying, the counseling. You have to be a really, really good counselor. I think you're right, by the way. I think psychology majors would make really good architects.
It would be a dangerous combination for sure.
It would be. There would probably be a lot of manipulation that goes on with that as well. But yeah.
So another thing that I'm kind of thinking about here as we're talking about this is, if you're in it for popularity, this is the wrong profession. So
Yeah,
as an
for sure.
enterprise architect or any one of these strategic kind of functions, uh, it's a tireless job. It's a job where your objective is to make others look good instead of yourself. Ego doesn't serve you well in this position, because if you have it, you're not going to last very long. And so being humble and helping others come up with these ideas in either direct or not so direct ways of making it their idea. Um, it's one of those things
Yeah.
where, it's not a popularity contest, and you do have to take a step back and you have to be humble about this stuff. And that, again, there's very few people that are willing to do that or able to do that.
Yeah, and I mean this. I think when you say enterprise architect to some people, right? They have this vision of like this guy that worked on like OS2 Warp and has like a long gray ponytail, and he descends like from the clouds with the answers in on large 40 by 20-inch pieces of plotter paper, right? And it's like, here is the architecture, I'm giving it to you, that sort of thing. That's just not how it is, right? It's like you're not delivering the answer.
Yeah.
You're helping other people come up with the answer, right? You're facilitating you might have some insight that you bring to it, yes. Some structure, some rigor, some depth, maybe some industry specific knowledge that you bring to it. But at the end of the day, like, are you more of an expert on Bob's system than Bob is? Probably not. So going in thinking that you are going to somehow know more than Bob does about, the thing that Bob does every single day for the past 30 years, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. And by the way, when you do that, Bob doesn't want to work with you. Bob
Right.
hates you, Um, I've known lots of Bobs, and they've hated me. No, but it's that whole thing. Humility, right, is so key. Now, I think there's a twist here, though, right, which is this whole idea that if you're just the quiet, humble architect working in the shadows to bring people together, people will begin to think like you'll be sort of like Batman in a way, right? It's like, does he really exist? Are they really there? We can do this without Batman, right? We don't need the architects as part of this. And so I think there's this thing where the architects almost in a lot of ways become invisible, or their contribution to the delivery of value of a thing almost becomes not appreciated, because let's be clear, they do add value to all sorts of processes in an organization, right? I defy you to come up with a fraud detection system in a financial services company without some form of an architect involved, right? So I think there's a really big question here of, and I don't know how aggressive we need to be as in the profession, but like, how do you go out and claim, right, your due of the role that you played, the role that your group of architects played in delivering this thing? If it's growing revenue by $100 gazillion, can you articulate that, what, our contribution was worth some part of that, and here's what that means to the organization, so that the next time something is going on, you're not having to do the sales job, right? The internal architect sales job. You really need an architect. Why? We have great pictures, like that sort of thing, which happens a lot, right? It happens in a lot of places. Well, we don't need architects. Bob knows the system. He's been working on it for 30 years. Let's just leverage Bob. The problem is Bob is myopic. Bob is like this. Bob is not thinking about, the art of the possible, or, any of these things of how could we do this better. And even if he was, he doesn't have the skill to talk to Jim or Nancy over here in the other group for any potential synergies between the systems or whatever. So I think, the architects need to emerge from the shadows. They need to, like Batman, right? When he first appeared, the Michael Keaton Batman is my original Batman, Adam West original Batman, but yeah, the first movie, right? Michael Keaton Batman, he comes out and he's like, I'm Batman, right? It's like, holy crap, he does exist. So I think architects need to emerge from the shadows a little bit, right? I'm, the architect. Who are you? Who are you? I'm the architect, right? That
Right.
Sort of
So I think you're definitely onto something, and I think you can be humble. You can be an arbiter, a facilitator of change and making others successful, but at the same time, running your enterprise architecture practice as a business. And what I mean by that is, some of the advice that I've given people in the past has been, come up with a brand for your enterprise architecture practice. What do you want to be known for? And celebrate and communicate the wins around what you're doing. And so if you go and help Bob with his big hairy problem, well, make sure that you're communicating that out and you're raising the awareness in the organization that Bob is super successful in doing this. But some of the reasons why is we came to the table and we gave Bob 3 options.
Right.
And in those 3 options, what we did is we just didn't, say high, medium, low. We actually did a significant amount of due diligence. We actually did some trade-off analysis. We made a recommendation. Now, he could go down that recommended path or not, but we don't go to jail when bad things happen. So, that's fine. He's got to, own
by the
that.
way, maybe architects should go to jail in some cases, right? There are some bad architecture decisions out there that cause all sorts of problems. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic.
But I think that's a broader issue as well in IT in general, right? Because most of the roles within IT are not actual professions. And so you can't really hold even a CIO or a CTO truly accountable for these decisions until we actually put some rigor behind it and professionalize it. And then the certifications mean something. Now
Yeah,
it's just a bunch
yeah.
of companies trying to monetize their view of a discipline, but there is no real kind of stickiness as far as from a profession perspective.
Yeah, and that's a really good distinction. So, like earlier, when I was sort of implying certifications don't matter, there's a bit of a there's a caveat to that, right? I'm implying for architecture, certifications don't matter because there is not a professional standard. To your point, right? There is, it's not like being a doctor. It's not like being a lawyer. You don't have to go before the board, right? That sort of thing, which maybe there should be, given the level of influence and impact, and I would argue value that's delivered by architects, right? On revenue, on product, on risk, on security. I mean, you name it. Architects are involved and probably should be, professionalized and accredited somehow. And I think Paul Price at ISA Global, right? He that's one of the things he's on his soapbox about quite often, correctly, I think. And people should go check that out for sure. So it's iasaglobal.org, I think it is.
Yeah.
And Paul Price is he's always on about that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think if you boil it down, to if you think about the value thing for just a second, right, and diverge on a tangent for just a sec, right? And you think about like, well, what is value? What, how do we define that, right? And if you just go to its most elemental, right, you're looking at, assets equals liabilities plus equity kind of thing, right? And if you think about that, it's like, well, where's the architect involved in all of that? And if you boil it down even further and you think about like, well, revenue minus net expenses is, net income. How is the architect playing a role in that? What, if you think about, okay, well, now expenses, about revenue, where are there things that architects are doing that move the needle on either one of those things in the formula? And I think that's an important place to begin. And I think, to your point about, telling sort of articulating the value that's being delivered, I would even go further back in time and say, I think architects should be sort of present when value is being defined for the initiative that they're involved with, right? So if let's say, what is value? Is value, reduced time to market? Is it increased revenue at the end of delivery of whatever? I mean, there are all kinds of different ways that we can define value, some of which, I know, there are folks like Tom Graves out there. He would argue, there are non-dollar denominated ways to define value. I kind of think that at some point in time, people that are paying your salary care about the dollar bit of it. But I think there's an argument there to be had of there are different ways to define value. And if the architect is not at the table when the value of an effort is being defined, you're hostage to whatever that value is. And you're probably not part of it. So I think, being part of, and look, I know you can't just insert yourself into meetings. Maybe you can. It probably depends on the person, but in a lot of places you can't just show up at the kickoff meeting. But
there comes Lockhart, another pop-in attempt.
I know, right? Oh, here he comes again. God, he's just hogging all the value. Here he comes with his charts and his gray ponytail. I think look, it's maybe you don't. If you're an architect, maybe you don't want to work at those places where they don't have a representation of architecture at the kickoff meeting or at the beginning of a process. I know you can't just quit your job, but I guess I don't know how to solve that problem. I'll just leave it at that. But it would be ideal if, right, you could be part of the process at the beginning and be part of how we define value for this initiative. And by the way, right, articulate from the beginning, these are the things that I will be doing, the products that I will be producing, the work that I will be, the activities that I will be doing. And the output of it is contributing to the value that we've defined. And here's how. And right from the outset, now everyone is on board, or maybe they're not on board. They're aware, right, of how you have articulated your role in the delivery of value for that effort. And then I think you're absolutely right. All of that's great. But if you don't tell that story, if you don't tell that narrative, right, sales and marketing is going to claim it, right? Mm-hmm. So the product guys are going to claim it, right? You've got to go articulate what you're doing, because as self-evident as it may be to you, many things are self-evident to me, I think, right, that are not to other people. You know, people aren't going to know that unless you tell them. I mean, it really comes down to that. And let's be clear, a lot of architects are not that great at interacting with, you know, human beings. So
And I think that's where the soul searching comes in for those enterprise architects to say, and I'm not saying for them to quit their jobs either, but it's really kind of coming to that proverbial Jesus moment of this is really what this role requires. And if I really want to thrive, if I want to tick boxes and say, yeah, I did an okay job, or work really hard to get to a point where you're just super uncomfortable and it's just not something you're really into or passionate about, and it's just another paycheck, then I would say this profession is probably not for you, and you should think about the escape plan at some point.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, like you said, no one's going to communicate and evangelize all the great stuff you are doing, because at the end of the day, human beings are human beings.
yes.
Incentive drives behavior, and if the incentive is
Perceived self-interest, right? Perceived
right,
self-interest. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And in corporate America, where there is a lot of sensitivity on how someone looks or retaining a position or hoarding information or data because there's a perception that that'll make you more influential or powerful in the organization, what have you, those are counterintuitive to some of the core principles to what an enterprise architect's trying to accomplish. And
Right.
so I actually did a presentation on this. I should probably put it out there in some form or manner. When I was at Gartner, I did a presentation at one of the EA summits, and in typical fashion, I had to have fun with it and play with it a little bit. And I knew a guy that took pictures of Star Wars toys and put them in all these different interesting positions and poses and all that. And I said, "Hey, I think it's really cool what you're doing, number one. But number two, can I use some of these images? Because what I'd like to do is I'd like to tell a story around some of these crazy positions and all that you're putting us through." And so that presentation was entirely in toys, Star Wars toys. And I told the narrative about how Darth Vader was the chief architect for an organization, and his way of handling things was through intimidation and essentially, a lot of choking out issues, right?
I find
And
your lack of faith disturbing, right? That sort of
right,
thing. Yeah.
that's the last time Nita will fool around and mess up, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so, what they decided, they said, look, this isn't working. We're stuck with this chief architect, but we got to help ourselves here. And so they actually brought in an outside consultant. They brought in Yoda to help them improve their image a bit and help them
No,
build a
no, wait a
brand.
second. Was Yoda? Were you Yoda in this
No,
narrative? Are
I,
you? Are
I
you
wasn't
Yoda?
even in this narrative. I was just
Oh, okay.
letting the Star Wars folks deal with it. But yeah,
I
I
would
was
be. I
telling this
want to
whole
be Han
story.
Solo. I want to be Han Solo. I want to be like the rogue, guy that somehow ends up saving the day. That's.
So Han Solo made it at the very end of the presentation. A lot of
Right.
it was, puns and, playing off of different tropes in Star Wars and relating it
Yeah.
back to, our profession. And that is a great example of one that I just have no shame on some of this stuff. But most importantly, um, it was the number one most rated presentation at the conference that year, which was awesome. But the most important part was you were able to land the message. It
Yeah.
resonated. People got
Yeah.
it. You knew your audience, and relating those in very simple but concise terms. And reason why I even brought up this presentation is it was all about branding your EA practice and
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
these small little moves of not telling people about all the great work you're doing really hurts you, hurts your department, and hurts the
Yep.
profession.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think part of that is understanding what do you do, right? It's like it's the scene from Office Space, right? It's like, what would you say you do here, right? I think, right, right. That's a great scene, right? Well, Bob, I come in late and I come up the back stairs and then I zone out for a while. No, but it's like, I think understanding what you're an architect, maybe you're a solution architect, a data architect, enterprise architect, whatever architect, understanding what do you do? What do you make? What do you produce? What things do you think about? Like all of this, right? And yeah, the whole organization doesn't necessarily care about all of those things, but it does care about some of the outputs of your work, of your thought. And I think making sure you know what those things are and where that they can provide value so that you can articulate it is critical, right? So if you're sitting around in your architecture organization and it's like, well, what do we do, right? And it's like, well, I'll give you five. Here's what I think architects typically do. Your mileage may vary, right? Architects are involved, right, in describing a change, the context of the change, first of all, right? What business problem are we trying to solve? Why are we doing this? So what if we do it? So they're involved in that process, and there may be artifacts that come out of that, maybe some guiding principles, maybe whatever it is. And then, of course, once that context is defined, right, they're involved in defining how that change is going to happen. What is the improvement that's going to happen here as a result of the work that we're doing? And there are different artifacts that come out of that, right? There may be diagrams, there may be blueprints, there may be whatever. There's a piece here around, well, you also need to be involved in collecting data to support the case for change, right? The type of change that we're making, if it's data driven, it becomes less susceptible to, how shall I say it, counter argument, right, within the organization. And so I think architects need to be involved in that process. So whether that is let's collect data on what our key performance indicators are going to be as a result of this thing, you should probably be involved in that process if you can, right? And there are artifacts that come out of that, right? And maybe they're maybe they're business cases, maybe they're whatever they may be, but architects should be involved in that process as well. Then of course there's like, great, now we have this stuff, what if we're going to make the change, let's make that change, let's be part of the execution of that change. Artifacts will come out of that as well. You will deliver things as part of that. Again, they may be diagrams, they may be whatever. And then of course, once it's out there, there's some analysis to be done. How well did that change go? What is the result of this change, right? All of these questions, again, probably dependent on data. And then now you've got all of this. My God, you have like the keys to the kingdom. You have the Bible here of everything about this change. Now tell the effing story about how you were involved in making that change. Because if you don't, it was like you were never there. I mean, honestly, that's how it ultimately becomes, right? And so I think, and so when you think about all of those things and all of the work products and things that could happen as part of those steps and those processes, there are a bunch of different skills involved in all of that. Not everyone is good with data. I'm almost at the point of saying, I think in order to be a really good architect, you kind of have to, be able to understand data at some level, because I don't know how you support your position, your argument, your design, your whatever, without some sort of, it can't just all be from the gut. Sometimes that works better than people would lead you to believe. But, I think you do need to support everything at some point with data. So I think you need to be pretty good at data. I think you need to be really good at telling a story. Do you need to be certified in WebSphere 3.5.6? Not anymore. And I would argue back in that day, you certainly didn't need to, because what does that gain you, right? Other than maybe a modicum of credibility if you're going in circles where that's required. But in order to perform the role of the architect, I don't think you need that. Now, again, the caveat is I do think we lack a professional standard for the whole industry and for the profession. And until there is something like that, I don't know that going out and saying, I know TOGAF, I know DODAF, I know PF, I know all these things. I know Zachman. I met Zachman. I know him. I know his family. Like, none of that matters really. If you don't produce these things, understand them, and tell the story about them.
It probably matters more that Zachman and his whole history versus actually having the certification, because now you've
That's
got
a really
some
good
really
point.
meaningful lessons learned
Yes.
and insights and all that great stuff, right?
Yep.
No, I agree, and I sometimes go on a bit of a rant about the whole professionalism nature
Yeah.
of this. I wrote a couple interesting blog posts about this a long time ago, where essentially I called it the demystification series, and some of the open group people weren't too happy with me after
Mm,
I posted some of those. But speaking to a lot of the key themes that you're talking about, which
right.
is um, as a profession, we're making these big decisions, and we're doing it in a way that is, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say it's irresponsible. It could
Mm,
be dangerous and reckless for us to do from an economic financial perspective, not necessarily doing bodily harm to somebody
right.
necessarily, but you
Maybe.
know, and I steal from other areas, like, the question of value. I always, and maybe this is because I started my career in banking, but, I'll, boil it down to value equals the risks that I'm willing to incur and the benefits in which I can gain from this. So
Yeah.
for those in the banking world, they know of risk adjusted value as a way of looking at a problem to see how valuable it is. So
Hmm.
if I can save $20 million, that might be valuable. If
Yeah.
I could avoid being on the cover of the Wall Street Journal and have to pay $20 million, maybe that's valuable,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's subjective, and it's based
Yep.
on the risks that I'm willing to take and what sort of hard benefit can I get out of this. And that hasn't steered me wrong too much. Obviously, some folks just don't want to hear that, and they just want to get to, oh, it's got to
Right.
be much much simpler than this, right? But
Right, of course, because it's simple, right? I mean, look, it's you're not an engineer designing a nuclear power plant, right? You're implementing Office 365 with an Active Directory backend, right? You're not lives don't hang in the balance, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, but again, engineering and designing a nuclear power plant is a profession that is accredited, that has standards, that has bodies and governance, and you know
and you will go to
basically
jail or you will be
you will
sued
go to
if
jail,
things go
and,
wrong, right?
right, and people will die,
Yeah.
right? That sort of thing. Civilizations will fall, right? That sort of stuff. But and not to denigrate our profession, but honestly, any Yahoo off the street could come in and call themselves an architect. What do you do? I'm an architect. What do you architect? Well, I manage the BlackBerry enterprise server, right? It's like, I don't know if those still exist, but
The
it's like,
BlackBerry Enterprise server. What?
yeah, I know. Again, you're an architect.
That's the
Yeah,
first
I
warning sign
architect
of you're not an architect.
number one. If it has BlackBerry in it, yeah, definitely not. But I think it's, look, if you're asking, are people asking the right question? Are architects asking the right questions and doing the right things as part of the process? I think there are like three big questions, right, that come to my mind when I'm thinking about participating in an effort, and they go along the lines of you know after the fact, right? So I talked about sort of how, the sort of the five things that I thought were sort of necessary to be involved with in that process. But sort of after the fact, what you're looking at in defining that value, if you're, in accounting or finance and you want to know the value of the thing that was delivered, and back to your point, it's contextual, but there's sort of three questions. The first is, did we do what we said we would do? Right at the outset, did we said we are going to do X, did we do that? That's an important question. Maybe there's value inherently just in that, maybe not. I think the next question, especially for the finance and accounting folks, is going to be, what did it cost? What did it cost to do the thing that we said we were going to do? And that's where you get into variance and all these things. Did we go over budget? Did we spend too much time? All that sort of stuff, which is really the third question. How long did it take to do the thing that we said we were going to go do for X number of dollars? And I think if you're telling a story as the architect, part of that process, if you can answer those questions and point to the things that you did that really answer a lot of those questions, those three questions, you're part of the way to going the distance to telling that story about your contribution to something. Because again, you can sort of do this and come up with a really good story, but if it's not grounded in some sort of data or an artifact or something tangible that someone can look at and say, I believe you because of that, because we're not accredited. Because I can't go and say the board of enterprise architects said that because I said this, you can take it to the bank, right? I mean, come on.
Maybe the American EA Association.
There you
so
go.
for those that are listening, there's a big opportunity for you out there.
Huge opportunity. The American Association of BlackBerry Enterprise Server Architects, right? And it's like, if I say that it's X, then it's X, right? And we don't have that, so you better have a really good story, and you better be grounded in some data, I would say.
Now, I think we're talking about one, really important aspect here around helping to facilitate decision making and problems that we know about right now. And I think, just highlighting that we are aware of this problem and we've maybe spun up a project, or it's a big hairy issue and you're in the war room and you're helping us figure out how we should approach this. But there's another aspect here that I think that enterprise architects sometimes miss because they get caught up in the reactive nature that we tend to get ourselves into instead of the proactive motion. How do we proactively protect the organization? How do we proactively seek out opportunities for the organization that our business leaders might not be aware of? Understanding the trends in the marketplace, applying those, and maybe even bringing together a council of like-minded organizations in our industry or even outside of our industry, partnerships with colleges, etc. And so I think another big part of enterprise architecture is that forward looking. So it's not just now in backwards 5, 10, 20, 30 years, but it's actually now 5 to 10 years out, because the things that we're solving problems for today, reflecting on how it was done and those decisions that were made, maybe those aren't durable for the next 5 to 10 years. Those approaches, those ways of doing things. And I think as enterprise architects, and with this responsibility of providing these recommendations, we definitely need to be on that innovation spectrum to be able to say, okay, option A is we could do it how we've always done it. Here's the risks of doing that. And the risks of doing that is we've got a bunch of fintech companies that are booting up all around you. We got folks like Apple, since we brought up Apple earlier, that has more credit card data than any bank on the planet. Maybe that's a problem for you. Or the digital giants, maybe Amazon consuming up, huge amounts of the retail and logistics industry, and painting that picture for them, the what if scenarios. So in your mind, Chris, do you see that same level of urgency that I do around innovation and that forward-looking proactive motion with enterprise architecture? Do you think that way as well?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, when you hear innovation, right, I think a lot of people think innovation of a process, of a product, of a something, right? And I think, to the degree that enterprise architects are involved in the creation of a product and do it in an innovative way, I'm sure it happens. I tend not to see that as much as I would see innovating a process or an approach, right? Which is to say, hey, look, there are ways to do new product development, and we all understand what they are given the patterns that have existed for 10 or 20 or 30 years. Great. Here's what it is. Where an enterprise architect can really innovate is to bring to the table, right? There is another way to do this that is forward-looking, and it's not something that is based in the past. And by the way, it may not even be repeatable in other contexts. That's a big caveat. But it's something that we haven't done it this way before. But given the enterprise architect, understanding of the business and the business problem we're trying to solve, and the pieces and the people and all the moving parts and all the threads, I see a way to do this that is different from how we've done it before. And I'm going to innovate in the delivery methodology or the process by which we I mean, this is where things like, CI/CD came from, probably originally, right? Is someone, a group of people, coming together and, being like, well, there's probably a better way to do what we're doing. And I think that's where innovation can come from. There's someone watching this probably that's like, no, that's not where CI/CD came from. It was Bill Smith in 2007, and read his book XYZ.
Yeah, it's Bob
Something like
in
that.
the BlackBerry Enterprise Server Department.
BlackBerry Enterprise. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, yeah, I think, look, I mean, yeah, I would ask you, I mean, have you ever seen an enterprise architect really innovating on a product level? I'm sure it happens. I don't see that as frequently. I definitely see it in the methodology, in the approach, in the ways of thinking, right? Which, by the way, asking the fundamental question up front, what problem are we solving, is kind of innovative for a lot of companies that don't think that way, right? And here's the other thing I would say. This goes back to the context thing, right? Innovation for the context that you're in may not be innovative somewhere else, right? That doesn't mean it's not innovative. It's innovative for where you are right now in the context that you're in. And you can still bring value to the table by doing that. Just because it's not like a totally brand new idea, if there are any totally brand new ideas, right? Just because it's not ever been done before, or it has been done before somewhere else, that doesn't mean in your context, in your industry, at your company, with the conditions that exist in your business, it may be innovative in that situation. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points, and I think one of the macro points that you're making is innovation is a lot like truth. It means different things to different people. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. I think innovation is the same way. It's some folks look at innovation as this R&D thing where you've
Right.
got a lab somewhere and
It's math, right? It's math
your
or
Xerox
something.
Park or something, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And you're making the next big thing, the Apple computer or whatever. Um, some people think that. Some people think that it is on the complete other end of the spectrum that I would define it as, which is more optimization stuff. It's we're going to
right.
innovate at kind of this incremental level, minor innovations around, a product, service, or process, right? Kind of how I look at this, where enterprise architects can really thrive, is whether or not you say the word innovation or not. It's really about creating a durable organization that's sustainable, and the
Yeah,
only way to do that is to really figure out where the market is going. And the old school way of looking at this, and what I cut my teeth on in banking, they called it due diligence. They didn't necessarily
mm,
call it innovation or trend spotting or horizon scanning, these fancy words, but it was do your damn homework.
right.
Where did we come from? Where are we at now? And what do we think based on the data that we have right now and the
Yeah,
leading indicators and tipping points, etc.? What sort of scenarios do we see playing out in the future? And now, you as an enterprise architect, when someone says, hey, I want to modernize this mainframe application and make it a client server application. Well, you could do that. And then someone else might say, hey, well, why don't we create a BlackBerry edition of that? But you, as the
mm,
enterprise architect, you're going to go, I'm sorry for those that are Canadian, Chris, but the
thank you.
BlackBerry is dead. It is 6 feet under in the ground. Perhaps we should look at what's going on right now, first off. And then second, it's where's it going to go? Is it really going to be on a Android or iOS device? Is it going to be maybe an AR, VR, MR type of
Right.
experience? And if that's the case, do we jump there now? Do we wait a year or two? Or
Yeah,
do we create an architecture that helps support us in that transition? So, where I see innovation coming in for enterprise architects is in that it's preparing the organization for that change, knowing
right.
that's going to come, presenting that information so they can make informed decisions.
Yeah, and the interesting part about what you said there, right, is you know, it can you make that sort of intuitive, future looking perspective real without really understanding what you're trying to do, right? So again, what business problem am I solving? To harp on it again, that should be the title of a book, by the way. I'm gonna write that down. it's
Just call
if
it,
I don't
why the hell are
know
we doing this?
why the hell are we do why the f are we doing this?
Right.
Yeah, that's great. But no, I think because there's this other phrase that I learned over time, right? It's like apple, dog, cat, spaghetti, right? And that means a bunch of different things. But what it means to me in this context is it doesn't matter if it's mainframe or BlackBerry or in a container somewhere or whatever. Like at the end of the day, the tech almost doesn't matter. It does matter, but it almost doesn't matter, because what really matters is, am I doing the thing that I said I was going to do? And so the innovative part comes in with maybe different ways to do that thing, different ways to get there, and different ways to understand the problem, right? But like, are you going to be innovative because like you can deploy Snowflake like no one else can or something like that? It's not the tool, right? It's not about the tech. It's not about being innovative. It's not about saying the mainframe is old school, BlackBerry is underground. What you need is whatever the Apple thing it would be, right? But it's like, it's not the tool. It's the things around that make the decision about what tool. That's where the important piece lies, right? I had a client not that long ago that we were doing some basically a reporting platform type of thing, but it was wrapped in some planning processes, and reporting was just a piece of it. But man, they wanted to see those reports, and they thought that was where the value was. And I get that, right? To a business person, it's like the value is the thing that I get that I can look at. And I spent the entire time trying to articulate, the real secret value here, guys, is that you now have a pattern in place that's been instantiated in a way that allows you now to do this repeatably, scalably over time. You can plug in new things, right? Just because we seeded it with a couple of reports to show you how it works, that's not the value. The value is in the backbone, the whatever you want to call it, the platform, right? And so people would argue, well, that's a tool. It was Tableau, I think, and something else, right? The Tableau was the front end. I think it was Teradata as the data management component. But that it wasn't about that. It was about the way in which those tools were deployed to solve the problem that they were looking to solve. And they keyed in on the report, and it was like, it's not the report. It's the way that I got the report. That's what you should be interested in. So that's how I would draw that distinction. I think that's where innovation can come into play, as an architect, in the way that you produce the things that you're producing, and for what purpose, and articulating that story. If you don't articulate it, it didn't exist. It didn't happen.
And so the question to you then is, what are the three things that you like most about Gartner?
I was actually going to go in on this a little bit earlier. I prefer when Betsy Burton had Burton Group Catalyst. I thought those were much better conferences. Maybe I'm the only one, but I thought they were a lot better than.
Now
than
remember, I said what's the three best things that you like, not Diggs. What are the things that you like the most about
right.
Gartner?
I'll also take this opportunity to say I was also booted from the open group. My presentation, the year that we met, I think my presentation was titled "Unarchitecture," and effectively, I got up and told a room full of people, don't use frameworks like the open group framework, right? Like TOGAF framework. Don't use that. And so I was going to write a blog post for them, and I said, well, I'm going to write this thing, and they're like, yeah. Went through a bunch of edits, and it effectively came back with like, no, we're not interested anymore. So I understand that. So the three things I like about Gartner, I enjoy being, in the trough of disillusionment. That's where I spend a lot of time, often, late night working on slides or whatever it is. I spend time there. I like the fact that they're in Connecticut. I think that's, a great place to run a research firm out of. I think that's fantastic. And of course, the third thing, the most important thing, you worked there. So, I mean, those are the three things about Gartner I like the most.
All right. So now you can complain,
Yeah.
bitch and moan as much as you want now.
I think Burton Group had better conferences, but I'll just leave it at that.
Actually, if I had my my prop
if
here.
Betsy's watching this, she knows that, right? It's like they were better. They were just better.
So Betsy didn't come from the Burton Group. She was always Gartner.
Was she always Gartner?
Yeah, she was like old school, early days Gartner. What you might be thinking of.
She would know then. She would know.
She would know. Uh, what was actually I thought was better were the meta group
Oh
conferences.
yeah, those are good ones. Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah,
used
yeah.
to give you those big, thick ring binders of all
Yes.
the decks and all this other information. Those were
Yep.
great conferences, and I
Yep.
was really, really sad to see those go. And when I joined Gartner, I said, "What the hell are you guys doing? Why aren't we doing this
Right.
anymore?" Never
Yeah.
got a straight answer, but yeah, a casualty
Um,
of acquisition war.
so I mean, top conference session, not conference, conference session you ever attended. Do you have one that comes to mind?
I'd have to think about that.
Okay,
I
I'll
mean,
give you mine. I have
I think the problem that I'm having with that question
one. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
there is the
10,000 of
person,
them.
there's the person that you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I really look up to this person, and then there
Right.
is the content, and
Right.
that's what I'm trying to tease out in my mind. But you go ahead, Chris. What's your number one?
Yeah. So my number one conference, I don't even remember what the topic of the session was. Um, I think it was at a Pega World conference. Maybe I'm not entirely. I don't remember, but the the guy that was running it was architect for like the British Aviation Authority, whatever, right? And was talking about something they did at Heathrow or whatever it was. And but what I don't even remember what this presentation was about because all I could see was the fact that he was wearing just like a t-shirt with a skull on it, some cut off jeans, and had what appeared to be a glass of whiskey on the lectern, while he was and then he was British, and then made a reference to he had showing a map, right, of aviation air patterns and traffic control, and there was this one, and there were a bunch of planes that happened to be over Germany, and he made the comment like, "That's the most air traffic that's been over Germany since 1945,"
Oh,
and I was just like, I was stunned, right? I was just like, this is either the most awesome thing I've ever attended or like just cringeworthy. But I do like the idea of sort of upending a little bit because I think some of them can become a little too stodgy, right? It's like, know your audience, be a good architect, all those things. But yeah.
uh, I agree. I think you have to find ways to shake it up, and that was my personal style, and what they would teach you as an analyst there, because they put a lot of emphasis on their conferences and making sure that you as a analyst could speak well, and you had gravitas and stage presence and all that. And one of the things that they taught you is know yourself, know
Right.
your personal style. Some people are kind of buttoned up, really kind of, what's the guy, Ben Stein ish. Um,
Yes. Right.
and then there's other guys like me. I don't take myself seriously, or too seriously. I'll make jokes at my own expense. I'll throw in a few dad jokes. I'll throw in some cheesy '80s pop culture references in the
Yeah.
presentation, and I just have fun with
Yeah.
it. And I look at it as, hey, we're all here for an hour. Let's have a little fun with this. Let's it doesn't have to be boring. You're falling asleep. Let's make this a little fun for everybody.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and that's just my style, but and others are very successful and they've got a different approach, and that's okay too. But you know,
But that goes to the heart of what we're talking about, right? Which
yeah,
is, you know, that presentation that I was referring to may have had amazing value as defined by whoever came up with the presentation, right? The value I got out of it was probably different than what the intended value was. And that came down to the narration, the storytelling, the way in which the thing that was being communicated was being communicated. And it's critical. If you can't do it, you could be the smartest guy in the world, girl in the world, person in the world, right? Smartest. If you can't communicate, it's irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant.
I
It
will
is
go one
irrelevant.
step further and say, in the context of enterprise architect on a stage somewhere, it has nothing to do about the intellectual quality of your material. It is about your entertainment value on
Yeah.
stage. Full
Yeah.
stop. If you take something and you make it into your Ben Stein up there, and you're going through each quadrant of Zachman's ontology,
Right.
you're dead on arrival.
Yeah.
But if you can turn it into, I don't know, I'm just kind of pulling stuff out an orifice here. But if you turn it into like Jeopardy and you have fun with it and you get the crowd engaged in it, and you do something
Right.
like that, oh, you're golden. And you might not
Yeah.
have told them anything of super depth, but what people are looking for is to learn a few things, but really be entertained.
Yeah, absolutely. The architect is the jester of the organization. Is
Oh,
that?
wow. You took it to a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
So, as we start to wind down a little bit, Chris,
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
it would be good to understand from you. Um, we talk a lot about innovation on the podcast. I think my personal opinion, I think for enterprise architects, um, I think they have a fiduciary responsibility to whether it be their
Mhm.
shareholders, to if you're in public sector, to the citizens, to future proof decisions, or at least
Yes.
make sure that leaders understand the implications of not understanding the innovations that are coming their way or the disruptions that are coming their way. So I guess for you and through your journey and your advice to your clients, um, what would be kind of the top few lessons that you've learned on how to apply, this forward looking, whether you want to call it innovation or not, but this forward looking perspective on enterprise architecture? What sort of lessons or best practices would you share with your clients?
Yeah. So, like for me, everything really comes down to, I think Patton said something right to the effect of, the ability to maneuver, right, the freedom to maneuver. He was talking about tanks, but it's the same with initiatives and technology and whatnot. Don't put yourself in a situation where you are restricted in the ability to make decisions, the ability to solve other business problems. If your solution to a business problem is confines you, you're probably going in the wrong direction. And so to future proof things, you know, this is why the great hedge of all architects and management consultants, I would add, is applicable and it's real. And that is, what is the answer to this question, Mr. Architect? Well, it depends. And it depends because context matters dramatically. The ability to anticipate future need matters incredibly here. And the bits that you are doing to solve whatever problem you're solving for, if they don't allow you to then pivot and solve a different problem, maybe using the same components or extending the solution or something, whatever the technology thing may be, you're putting yourself in a straitjacket. So I mean, maybe it's a trope to say flexibility. So I'll use the Patton analogy. It's maneuverability. You need to be able to maneuver. And so the days of the monolithic solution, people are saying, oh, the monolithic solution is gone. Probably, but context matters, right? So there may be, I can't really think of one, but there may be a scenario where a monolithic solution actually gives you the greatest freedom to maneuver after the fact. And so I think all of that comes into play.
I'll give you a great example of a monolithic
Is it
solution.
is it
Now it's at a
BlackBerry
higher
Enterprise?
level,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
but Amazon, their supply
Yeah.
chain.
There you
They've
go.
created a monolithic, closed supply chain
Yeah.
that provides them competitive advantage and is
Right.
slaughtering their competition, FedEx,
Right.
UPS, DHL, all these
But
guys,
try to get out of it.
retailers.
Try to get out of it. Right.
Right.
Like right now it's like, well, we have to pivot and because we need, there's a business reason why we got to do something over here. Holy crap, we can't, because if we do, either the costs go way up or we lose access to the supply chain management bits or whatever the case may be, or our customer base, which is only going to find our stuff this way through the marketplace, whatever it may be. Right. Yeah. So it's like almost full circle to what we were talking about sort of pre-recording here today about Winamp, right? Winamp being like sort of the perfect solution to manage your music in the 90s, and how iTunes and don't get me started on Google Play Music and the absolute disaster that turned out to be, because I was a believer. But this idea that Winamp Winamp maybe is the right metaphor here. Winamp was great at what it did. It did a very specific thing. It solved a very specific business problem, and it solved it well. And it didn't try to do anything else, right? And then It's like, no, 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 no. iTunes is the way that you need. Oh, let me take over your music library and start moving things around and making duplicates of files, and then we're going to put it all in the cloud. But you have to be in our ecosystem if you want to use it, and all this sort of stuff. And I think to the extent that it gave you more capabilities, I don't know that it really solved the music problem any better. I think it made it worse. So I think that's a good metaphor, right, for this maneuverability thing. I want the ability to just play the songs that I want to play. I don't need it to manage my library for me. That's a capability I didn't need. So yeah, that would be my advice. I mean, I think it's make sure that you are giving yourself room to maneuver going forward. Otherwise, you're really screwed.
No, I agree. I think that's really good advice, and I think while innovation is important, it's also putting yourself in check and saying, what's the likelihood that this innovation is actually going to provide any sort of meaningful value? And
Right.
I would say, now people are buying records, so take that, Winamp.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
But
exactly.
but again, it's for a different need, and yada yada yada.
Now they're
But
buying their music legally. Take that, Winamp.
right,
Yeah.
right. Take that, Napster. What do you have to say about that?
Right.
Metallica won.
LimeWire. Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, completely agree.
now, second to last question I'll ask you, Chris, is
Sure.
In your career, you're been a strategist, historian, an author. You've done lots of different things.
Yeah.
If there was a career life lesson, doesn't have to be a personal life lesson, but a career life lesson that if you had a mentor sitting in front of you, what would be that one lesson learned that you've learned on your journey across all these different spectrums of your career that you would impart upon somebody?
Don't get overworked about education. Not everyone needs a 4-year degree. Not everyone needs an MBA. We can't afford for everyone to have an MBA. There aren't enough MBA jobs, so that makes no sense for everyone to have an MBA. I think you can do the job of an enterprise architect or of a management consultant doing enterprise architecture or whatever without advanced degrees, or even degrees in the field that your degree would imply that you need to go into. I mean, I was taking history. Full disclosure, I was taking computer engineering at the beginning, and I was like, I remember I had my, I don't know if you remember Mathematica, right? But I had like this gigantic book, right? And I was on the 10th floor of Warren Towers in Boston University, and I just threw it out the window, right? So like $150 textbook out the window, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I switched to history because I enjoyed history. And I think people don't go to college for what they enjoy. They go for what they think is going to make them a whole bunch of money. Well, I'm here to tell you, folks, you don't need a degree in the thing that you're going to do, right? You don't. Okay, doctors, lawyers, yes, fine, got it, right? Bio research
But
person,
you're not talking about a real profession, so you don't need a degree for that.
That's true. That's true.
See how we just went full circle?
I know it may change in the future, right? But I think people get overwrought about like, well, if I don't have this degree, I can't even apply for this job. No, apply for the job, because it turns out that how many consultants that have like chemistry degrees and stuff like that has no bearing on the thing that they're doing. And I think it's because, look, we have diverse interests, and to sort of box it into like, you are this, you're in this thing here because that's what your degree is. That's crazy. And if I was to go back in time, don't do this, kids. I would tell myself, just get out of here. Go and do the world, and don't worry about the degree. Now, that may have disqualified me from some jobs, maybe. But I think I would have enjoyed my time better, right? I don't know that those 4 years did a whole lot for me in my life. You're still growing. I get all that sort of stuff. I think the Army did more for me than university did, to be perfectly honest. But I don't know.
I actually 100% believe in everything that you just said. I agree. I think that people look at college as a once and done thing. Like I go and get
Yeah.
this education, I get this piece of paper, I'm good to go now. So, love
Where's
me,
my
pay me
job?
lots of money.
Right. Where's my 6-figure job? Come on,
Right.
guys. Yeah. Yeah.
But, really, really flipping the script and say, you're always learning.
Mhm.
And you've got a responsibility to do that. If you want to move into a career and you don't have that knowledge, well, go get that knowledge, right? And
Go
that's
get
what
the
I
knowledge.
loved about being in consulting was they would throw you in the deep end. They'd say, "Oh, well, you don't really know X, Y, or Z or this industry." Well, you've got 2 weeks to learn it because you're going to be on site on the client,
That's
and
right.
you better put your A game on, right?
Yep.
So, but I also think there's a balance there to help protect this profession as well. And I'm a huge fan of introducing the notion of an apprenticeship.
Mm.
I think that there should be an EA apprenticeship type of thing because a lot of the work that an EA does, there's a lot of technique to it.
Yeah.
There's, and that's stuff you can't get out of a textbook, even if it's not in college. But it's learning the ropes, kind of, when to do certain things, situational leadership, etc. I would actually say the apprenticeship deal is more important than a certification or a formal course or a practitioner's whatever.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that, Mike. I think what we are now what we're really talking about here is founding the trade school for enterprise architecture and enterprise architects. And we can teach that class and give out our own. I think at graduation, instead of the traditional, what's that hat called with the flat thing and the
I don't know
tassel?
what that's called.
It's got a name. I forget what it's called, but like instead of that, we give out the jester hat, right, with the bells on it, right? Because you are the court jester, you are the entertainer, right, of
Right.
the organization. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Again, this is fantastic. We agree on so many things. It's the easiest conversation I've had all day.
So if people want to get a hold of you to kind of pick your brain, or if people want to yell at you for all the things that you've said here today, what's the
Yeah,
best way for people to get a hold of you?
yeah. I'm gonna set up a customer service number for all the complaints.
Or you could just say, find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. LinkedIn is the way to do it. Chris Lockhart on LinkedIn. In fact, it's the LinkedIn URL, and it's just Chris Lockhart, all one word. You can go to chrisonea.com, all one word. You can buy my book on Amazon, The People Problem. But you have a book coming out too, right? Isn't that coming out soon?
Yep.
We should have like a virtual Zoom launch party. Do you have an advanced copy? Can you hold it up? There it is. Rewire. I love it. That's awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, I think website. LinkedIn is the best way. And then we should. I want to hear all the complaints. People should be free to tell me why I'm wrong. I learn the most that way. Happens a lot.
I would love to have a conference of.
So.
I would love to have a conference where it's nothing but people complaining about the things that we've said. I think that actually, I would think that would be a lot of fun.
I think it would be too. We should do an Ask Me Anything on like Reddit or something.
Yeah.
Is there an R enterprise architecture channel on Reddit? I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe there should be.
All right, sir.
Pictures and diagrams.
Yeah. Listen, anyway. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I think you shared a ton of really great wisdom for folks to chew on. Probably more than enough that they'll have to rewatch it a couple times, but that's okay. But hopefully you'll come back and we'll keep doing this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it. Good to see you. Happy New Year, and let's chat again soon.
All right.